about money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
So it is Saturday, and we're going to be talking about money. And while the program introduces me as the host, I want to let you know there's going to be co-hosts to the program. One of those co-hosts is Chris Yend, who's here with me. He's an advisor, and you're going to be hearing from him on and off. You're going to be hearing from Jensen Winan. You're going to be hearing from Al Souza. Those are all going to be co-hosts in the program. You're going to be hearing from them. So I just want to let you know that's what's going on. Today, we've got a lot to talk about. We're going to continue something we've been talking on and off for months about, is COVID, the Pearl Harbor moment of our lifetime. There were huge changes in that came from Pearl Harbor, and not necessarily Pearl Harbor itself, but Pearl Harbor launched the United States into World War II. And during World War II, there were tremendous and dramatic changes in technology and lifestyles and in demographics. Think about the technology, the nuclear, the computers, the pharmaceuticals, the radar that came out of that, lifestyles, education. The GIs went back to college. Education took a big jump up. Women entered the workforce during that time. The interstate highway system and the airports were built. Media and telephone became common in our daily lives. And demographics, life expectancy went up. Women not only joined the workforce, but they began to get older as well. I guess that's just kind of a natural thing. I mean, that's a pretty stupid thing to say, huh, actually. People were leaving city centers to go to the suburbs, and there was a migration from the older cities in the Midwest to the West and the South. That's what was happening. I'm going to talk. Today, Chris and I are going to share. I'm one of the silent generation. I finally figured out what generation I belong to. Not the great generation, which was those people born before 1945. Not the baby boomers, because I was born in 1943 of all things. So it's the silent generation. We should just shut up and be silent. Actually, we weren't silent. We had a tremendous impact coming out of that time. But what we think is going to happen is we are entering into one of those times which is going to be just as dramatic for the next 10 or 15 or 20 years as it was coming out of World War II. That's one thing we're going to be talking about today. Chris and I are going to be sharing. Chris is going to be giving you his perspective as a young person in his 20s. I have my perspective from the 70s, and we'll be talking about that. But I also want to talk, and we're going to get to a new suit that was filed on annuities. And if you've been listening to the program very long, you know what my thoughts are on annuities. They're maybe the worst investment you can make. But the insurance industry and the brokerage industry has filed suit. I'm going to tell you about it afterwards. We're going to talk about that. And we may get to talking about long-term interest rates. Why are they so low? Hopefully we can get to all that. If we don't get it all in today, we'll be talking next week about it. But let's start. You know, when I think about the time when I was growing up, and at Christmas time during this past year, we played a lot of Christmas music. We talked about how we ended up with that kind of music, the music that was written, I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas, and all those other songs, like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer from 1959. I was just 16 years old. I saw Mama Kissing Santa Claus. All those songs that came out of that time, it was my generation. I remember growing up with TV, Leave It to Beaver. It was one of the most popular TV programs. And what you saw is Ward Cleaver, Beaver's husband, or Beaver's father, would get up, he would dress in a suit, he would take his briefcase, he would go out the door to go to work, and at night he would come home with his briefcase and his suit? And never once, during years of that program, did they ever identify what he did as a occupation. That was, who knows? You know, people have said maybe it was insurance, maybe it was this or that. Nobody really knows because that was never part of it. That was not part of that baby boomer silent generation. It was a time when going to a restaurant was a very, very big deal. You did it for a birthday or an anniversary. But during my generation, Shakey's came out with pizza. McDonald's came out with hamburgers. Kentucky Fried Chicken came out with, of all things, chicken. I mean, that fast food came. And suddenly you had a generation that instead of cooking all every day, they went out for fast food. And by the way, as I grew up, we didn't have a dishwasher. That was part of the chores that children did, or at least in my family, it was children that would wash the dishes and dry the dishes and put them away. You know? And we also got a clothes washing machine and a dryer. The dryer was later in life, but it used to be you hung out the clothes on the clothesline to dry. That was how they got dry, not in a dryer. And it was at the World's Fair, 1962, I think, that they introduced the microwave. You know, if you wanted to heat a meal, you used to have to stick it in the oven or eat it cold. I mean, all those things happened. It was a very different time. To go from coast to coast, not an airplane. You used to get on a bus and go, if you took transportation, or a lot of people, we went on vacations, you'd pack everything into the car and you would drive straight through for 24, 48, 72 hours to go from one place to another. That was for a 1 week vacation. And then you'd stay someplace for a day or two, and then you'd get back in the car and drive back all the way. Those were vacations. That was a very different time. So, as I talk about that, Chris, talk about what's going on now.
I mean, it's hard to know where to even start, Mike. You know, there's quite a bit going on right now. You know, we see the evolution of the internet. We've seen, you know, the products of this. We've begun to see, you know, this video game revolution that was really, you know, you talked about things that were, you know, marketed to your generation. Well, to mine, you know, it was the Xboxes, it was the PS4s, it was the Nintendos of the world. These video games, especially in the early 2000s, had a really big impact on my generation and ultimately what, you know, people end up doing. We see more software engineers now than we've ever seen in our, you know, in existence, right? Well, you know, my personal theory is that this comes out of, you know, I call it the Xbox kids. You know, when I was young, I like to tell the story. You know, when we were younger, I had a grandfather who was, you know, in the, you know, nursing home and kind of on his last legs. And, you know, when you're, you know, 5, 7 years old, going out to see grandpa at the nursing home wasn't exactly the most exciting thing in the world, right? And so, you know, my parents, being the good parents that they are, they bribed us, right? We went to Costco one day and we went down the aisles and they essentially said, you know, what's going to get you excited to go to grandpa and go see him, right? Well, the first aisle we went down was the Lego aisle, right? Or I don't even know what you call that, right? But we went down that aisle and we got a bucket of Legos, right? And that's what I decided to play with, you know, every time I went to see grandma. But we also got another gift, and this was for my brother. And they got him an Xbox, right? And so, you know, every time we'd go see, you know, the grandparents, there was just me and my brother, and we made our choices. I would play with the Legos and he would play with, you know, the Xbox. Well, you know, I did play with the Xbox a little bit, I gotta be fair, right? But I like to think that I was the Lego kid. Well, as we've grown older and, you know, and we've seen, you know, graduate college, you know, get older, start working, you know, and I'm here now talking, right? you see the differences between the kids that played Legos and the kids that decided to, play a lot of video games. My brother to this day still plays, 4 to 6 hours of games, and and he's going to go into software engineering and that whole realm. Well, me, I didn't really like the Xbox as much. It was fun, right? You enjoy playing with your friends, but that was later. I enjoyed the Legos. I enjoyed building, and now you kind of see where this leads us, and kind of the outcomes that result from from this marketing, really.
And through that whole gaming experience, what's happened is gaming has become a big deal in terms of training new employees, in terms of marketing. We're starting to see a lot of places that are beginning to use games or gaming technology to actually do marketing to your generation and to those generations around you. I mean, all of that started with the Xbox and some of that technology that was fun to do, but it's actually being used for actual marketing and training, job training. I mean, during my time, we didn't have an Xbox.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We played marbles.
Yeah.
A lot of times in the dirt. Anyway, so I'm here with Christiane. We're co-hosting the program, and will be for some time, along with Jen and Al. So, we started talking about the differences in the generations and the things that we experienced. If you look at what's happening, things are changing so much faster today. If you look at the printing press, which was a truly breakthrough technology, it took several centuries. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It took centuries to make an impact. Think about it today. So, Chris, when you were growing up, when did you first have a smartphone?
First smartphone. That's a good question. It had to be right at the end of high school, I think, is when it started. I remember when I was in junior high, the iPhone had just been released, and that was a game changer.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
I mean, 15 years ago, there were no smartphones.
Mm-hmm.
Today, there's 6.6 billion smartphones in the world. 83% of the world's population has a smartphone. Think of the changes that have happened. So think of what we've just gone through with COVID. Wearing a mask, remote shopping. I mean, think about the changes that we're going to be facing. Working remotely. So, there was a time in which, when I started in the brokerage business, you came into the office at 6:30 a.m. and you left maybe at 1:30 or 2:30 or 3:30, or I would usually work until 5 or 6. I used to say I only worked half days from 6 until 6. Your schedule's changed. Tell us about your schedule.
Yeah. I mean, my boss is in the room, so I got to be a little more careful with what I say. No, but it's dramatically changed, and it's even changed from West Coast to the East Coast. On the East Coast, people are a little bit more traditional. They get up at 6, they work till 5, and there's no breaks. But over here on the West Coast, especially going to different businesses and seeing different schedules, you realize that most people only work from about 10 to 2 o'clock. I mean, it's especially with the changes in COVID. You had talked about this a little bit. COVID made us realize a couple of things. One, that we can work at home and we can be successful at working at home.
Yep.
But two, it being more efficient with our time. People, when they go to work these days, they don't need to be spending 8 full hours working, right? Because realistically, how much of that time are they being productive, right? I guarantee you, if you ask anyone in almost any industry, how long would it take you to get your actual work done, right? And most of them would say anywhere from 2 to 6 hours, in that range. Well, if the average work day is about 8 hours, I mean you're wasting time. And so I think what COVID brought out was just that right there, that we don't need to be working 8 hours a day anymore. You should. Right.
Yeah.
But,
No, I think it's made a huge change. And what we saw at the end of 2021 is more people were quitting work it was a record number of people quitting work. And when they did surveys, they found that 5% of the people that they surveyed, if they were ordered back to the office, they would quit. They would never go back. 40% said that they would go back, but they would immediately begin looking for a new job. And we're seeing that was not just a survey. We're actually seeing that fulfilled. That's changed the way that we're going to have office work. There's an attorney's office that is in the building above us. They've had 3 floors, and they had to have been one of the original occupants of what's the black box? The original black box, not the Columbia Tower, but the original black box, now the Safeco Plaza. I mean, they were there forever. Their lease is coming up, and they're going to reduce to 1 floor. I mean, it's a dramatic change.
And even when we go to work, I mean, when I take the elevator up to the office, you know, I'm lucky if I see another person. We've been going into the office now for 6 months, something along those lines, and I would tell you maybe a handful of times have I ridden in the elevator with somebody else.
Yeah, the same with me. And I'm always surprised to watch them push the button and see what floor they go to.
Yeah.
'Cause I will oftentimes ask, so what firm are you with? Who's on this floor? And, you know, there are a lot of people, a lot of floors that no one ever punches the button to.
And most of the offices on our floor are vacated. You know, people, they just aren't coming into work anymore, or at least in the office anymore. They're just going to work. But, you know, even going to the bathroom, it's kind of nice. I have my own private bathroom on the floor. I have not been in there with anyone else this year, and it's, you know, it's kind of nice.
It is.
Yeah.
No, I mean, working conditions have really changed. And the other thing that's happened is the advent of Zoom. And not just Zoom, but some of the other visual things. You know, we're reaching across the world with our clientele now. And Zooming has become just one of those things that people do.
And that's going to evolve. And that's going to continue to evolve. You know, originally we talked about earlier when the web first came out in the 90s, it was, you know, Web 1, and that was, you know, information that you just took in. Well, now we're in this realm of Web 2, where you can take it in, but there's also an interactive. You can post things. You know, if you think about social media for a second, when you look at social media, you're basically looking at static information and taking most of it in. Occasionally you can post and whatnot, but it's pretty one-sided, and the content is owned by, you know, the entity that's putting it, for example, you know, a big tech company. What's going to be wild to see, Mike, is when we evolve to Web 3, and when data is owned by the consumer, and data is no longer static, but it's interactive, and you're moving around it, and that's going to go into Zoom. Right now we're realizing that we can work remote. We can work with just cameras and computers, but the evolution of that is going to be 3-dimensional. And soon, you know, we're going to be in the same room, in the same world as people, without actually being in that same room. We're going to be in different parts of the world, and it's scary, but it's also exciting with what's coming.
It's like virtual reality.
Ready Player One.
Yeah.
And it's coming. I mean, you look at Facebook, for example. They changed their name to this whole project. They changed it to the Meta, and you see, you know, this whole idea of the metaverse is, it's going to be a combination of everything. It's going to be a combination of Zooming. It's going to be a combination of the video games that we've seen, the Xbox that we mentioned earlier. It's going to be not only a social world, but a world that you can work in, that you can be entertained in, that you can hang out, you can do everything that you do in real life, but in a virtual setting. And it's about 10 years away, but it's coming.
So when we talk about metaverse, explain what metaverse is.
Yeah, so metaverse, and it's kind of hard to. You got to understand blockchain technology, and you got to understand Web3, and you need to understand where we're at now, right? So when we go back, we talked about Xbox for a really long time, And then we talked about, what evolved from Xbox, right? People enjoyed playing games. It was fun, right? Whatever. But eventually they wanted to play games with friends. They wanted that community, right? And so then we started to see things like World of Warcraft, where people log on and they play together in these big realms. And then we saw, the Club Penguins of the world, where it was just purely social. You would go and log on and you would talk to your friends. But this has begun to evolve, and we've seen it over time. We've now seen, Fortnite, right, where people are all in the same world. They can talk and they can play together, but it's also evolved into concerts, and it's evolved into this entertainment element. Now we're seeing companies like Roblox that's putting all of this together. It's a interactive world that you can hang out, that you can go to concerts, that you can, play, talk with your friends. All of these different things are combined into one. So what is the metaverse? Well, the metaverse is going to be the next evolution of social media. And when I say that, what I mean is, when you log on to Facebook right now, right, and you're looking at your feed, you are taking in information, right? And what happens is a limbic hijack, and that's essentially when your frontal cortex turns off and you simply take in information, and it's you simply just take it in, right? But what's going to happen is eventually those social media platforms are going to be interactive. Instead of simply logging on and looking at posts and content, you're going to be able to enter a realm where you're actually being social again, where you're in a world where, kind of like Ready Player One, where you can talk, where you can meet, where you can hang out, where you can do all of these different things, and it's all going to be combined into one area. So it's never going to be a replacement for reality, right? There's always going to be that separation between, the digital realm and reality, but what it is going to be is a replacement for what we already have. And it's just the metaverse is going to be an evolution of current social media.
And as we talk about this, it's really interesting, because these are all going to be investment themes as we go forward. These are going to be opportunities. Many of the companies that will be benefiting don't exist today. I mean, you think about it. I mentioned the smartphones. 15 years ago, there were no smartphones. We're going to see companies that suddenly emerge with all this technology, with this lifestyles and with the demographics. There are going to be opportunities for investment. And I can say it, that Chris will be more on top of this than I will. That's for sure. I'm just learning about some of the aspects that the technology is already 10 years old. I mean, we're moving along so fast. That's one of the reasons why somebody like Chris's and Jen and Al is going to be so important in terms of moving forward with the investments. We live in a time of such rapid change, and it happens so fast. I think of the example of the 9/11 and the changes that happen in bunches. The cockpit doors, the air marshals, the banning sharp objects and liquids, all that. Don't go away, because we've got more to talk about when we get back. So Chris and I are here. We've been talking about, is COVID the Pearl Harbor moment of our lifetimes? We've been talking about this thing for months. We're talking about how it's impacting lifestyles and demographics. We've talked about technology in the past. We're talking about lifestyles. So there's one more thing I want to ask about. NFTs. Tell us what about an NFT?
Yeah. So simply, an NFT is the process of making a one of one, right? It's you could almost think about it as a patenting something, right? And so now NFTs, when people think of it, there's usually two schools of thought. The first is, someone that is aware of NFTs, that has a decent knowledge, will go, okay, yeah, I've heard of them before. It's, these pictures on the internet. It's like art, right? And you can buy and sell it, and maybe there's apes, right? That would be, person number one. Now, the other person would say, I have no clue what it is. What is an NFT? That doesn't make any sense to me. I've never even heard of it. I don't want to know. Well, the NFTs are fascinating, because right now what we're seeing is we're seeing the art community fully adopt them, right? We're seeing for a long time the art community has had a really hard time monetizing their work, right? If you want to make it as an artist, you're really right now your only avenue is through a gallery or through selling online through different mediums, right? Well, what NFTs are able to do is it gives you a bigger platform to sell your art into a wider scope of people that can end up buying it. But what is an NFT? An NFT is the process of making a one of one, right? And it's really the underlying technology that is so fascinating. So in my prediction, what we're going to one day see is we're going to see NFTs for concert events, for Seahawk games, for Mariners, right? We're going to see them in the ticket format. Why? Well, because NFT is the process of making something a one of one, right? And then supply and demand is what gives it value, right? So not every NFT is going to be traded. So when we look at like tickets, when you want to go to a game and you want to, verify that ticket is real, that it hasn't been faked, there's a lot of, scalpers out here. You want to eliminate that. So what is one way to do it? Well, the easy way is basically putting your ticket onto making it a one of one, putting code behind it, right? That's the simple term, and verifying that it is in fact that one of one, right? Well, when you start to understand that the NFT isn't just art, right? It's just the process of making code one of one. You can begin to see the use cases and the broad use and the different people that are going to start adopting this, right? Not just Ticketmaster and different concert events, but you're going to see it in the healthcare industry. You're going to see birth certificates one day be issued as an NFT because that's a way of patenting it, a way to make it, a way to make that one of one, right? And here's a funny example. Gilead recently had 85,000 counterfeit bottles of its HIV medication that had been plagiarized, right? It wasn't authentic. There was a group of fraud that had that essentially made this fake drug, right? And so what could an NFT do for Gilead, right? Well, NFT, what they could do is they could make a QR code, right? Because that's essentially what this is. It's coding, right? And to authenticate it, you would put that QR code, and so you would know that drug is real and that it's not. Yeah. Do you see where I'm going with this? It's kind of hard to describe, right? But it's the process of making a one of one. And so we're going to see these in a lot of different areas. We're going to see them in schools. People's report cards are going to be on them. We're going to see them in different industries, blockchain, the whole 9 yards. But really, an NFT is the process of making something a one of one.
Yes. So technology is changing. Mm-hmm. Lifestyles are changing. Demographics are changing. It's important to understand because those are going to be investment themes going forward for the next decade, or at least 5 years, or maybe 2 months. Who knows? Yeah. But it is going to be a real change. One thing that's not a change, and I'm shifting gears now, but one thing that's not a change are annuities.
Chocolate-covered hand grenades.
Chocolate-covered hand grenades. And if you've been listening sometime, you know that I do not like annuities. They have a place. And for a limited number of people, they're the right thing, but they're oversold. Helen Allen, in her book, Pound Foolish, Exposing the Dark Side of the Financial Industry, said there's 2 things you need to know about annuities. First, they're increasingly sold to baby boomers worried about running out of money. And second, they're so complicated, they're so difficult to understand, so many financial penalties, that they are to the benefit of the financial advisors. They're sold for one and only one reason, and that's to make money for financial advisors. Now, there's something that just happened with this administration, with what has just happened in terms of annuities and the sale of annuities. And there was a suit filed at the beginning of February by the Federation of Americans for Consumer Choice. It's an industry group of insurance companies and brokerage firms. And they are suing. They're saying that that they want a change in a new interpretation of the fiduciary rule. Now, the fiduciary rule, what that means is every decision that a financial advisor or an insurance salesperson should make should be in the best interest of the client. And they're suing to remove that. They're trying to say pouring the same old wine into a new bottle doesn't change the result. I thought that was an interesting way that they explain annuity sales being held to a fiduciary standard. They're saying that their firms are going to be directly affected by this whole thing. Now, I have a tough time understanding this whole thing. I have a tough time finding a reason why a financial advisor or an insurance salesperson should sell anything when it is not in the best interest of the person who's buying the annuity or taking the advice on investments. I have a really, really difficult time understanding how it's just in the firm's best interest or in the advisor's best interest. Now, for insurance people, so Chris, you interviewed it at a few of these places as you were graduating from school.
Yeah.
Tell us.
It's funny. I don't have a super in-depth knowledge of annuities, but I do. I know them well enough to know that you don't want it, right? It's typically the big print gives it to you, small print takes it away, right? And we're all investing in the same stock market, so do you inherently trust an insurance company? Yes or no? No. Well, coming out of school, you're young, you want to get a job, you want a good job, right? And so you're get interview around. And so before I took the job here at Adams, I went to a couple of different, big broker. I'm not going to name them by name, but if I did, everyone here would recognize them. And I would sit in these interviews, and they would essentially pitch me why you should buy the annuity, right? Why this makes sense, why this is in the best interest. Me being young, I don't know everything in the world, right? But I know enough that an annuity is not in the best interest of a client, right? It's not in the best interest of anyone. Unless you cannot handle money, unless the minute you get it, you're going to go spend it, there is no purpose for an annuity, right? Other than that guarantee. And that just plays on investor fear. So going back to my story, because I'm bouncing around a little bit, I went to a number of different firms. I sat in the meetings. I asked them different questions. Why would you put someone in an annuity when you could simply put them into the S&P 500 index, right? Just put the money in there, virtually no fees, let it ride, right? Because that's when you look at the separately managed accounts of the annuity, that's oftentimes what they're going to invest it in, right? So I asked them, why do you guys do this? Why do you put people into annuities? And they didn't have a good answer for me, other than with a number of them with their Rolexes shining on their and their nice pinstripe suits and whatnot. Their only answer was that it makes them a lot of money. I joke to Mike sometimes that if I didn't care about my clients and I just wanted to be rich, already, I would just go sell annuities, because the fees that they make are absolutely absurd. And in the interviews, I was able to get that. I was able to see that. You see these guys that they really don't care about their clients at all, right? They don't. That's not important to them. What they're there for is to make money, and you can't blame them. But for people with a heart, it's just, yeah.
So the suit that's being registered is that they want to overturn the idea that the financial advisors, the insurance salesmen, will be held to a fiduciary standard, making that decision in the best interest of the client. And these are people that are coming out of 401ks and are being advised to invest in an IRA. And the Department of Labor wants to hold the advisor and their firms to a fiduciary standard to be sure that it's in the best interest of the client. Now, why is it a big problem for the firms? Because they can be sued if it's not in the best interest of the client. They don't want to be sued. They want to be able to make this sale. The financial advisors or the insurance salesmen can make up to 14% commission, and they want to walk away from any responsibility. Any responsibility. To me, I just don't understand that. I don't understand putting the firm's interest ahead of the client or the financial advisor ahead of the client. Anyway, enough said about annuities. We will come back, and I want to talk about long-term interest rates when we come back. So I want to talk about interest rates for a little bit, because I believe that we're probably going to enter a new phase where we're going to see interest rates rise. And I've been saying that for a long time. I know I've been saying that for a long time, but I think we're really reaching close to the point where that is going to happen. So if you look at a curve, what's called the rate curve or the yield curve, what you find is short-term interest rates are right around the Fed funds rate, plus or minus a little bit, right around actually the inflation rate. If inflation is at 2%, you usually find the Fed funds rate running around 2% or 2.5%. The inflation rate is running 17%. You find short-term rates around 17 now. That's what we experienced in the 1970s. Long-term rates are adjusted for the rate of inflation. They're usually about 1.5% higher than short-term rates, 1.5% to 2.5% higher. And what that is to compensate for the risk of inflation. Because if you buy a 10-year bond or a 30-year bond, you have the risk that inflation is going to reduce the value of that bond by the rate of inflation. And so long-term rates are usually higher than short-term rates to adjust for the rate of inflation. Then if you want to draw the complete picture, stocks are again a couple percent higher than that to adjust for the added risk over and above what a bond is. But long-term rates, 1.5% or so over the rate of inflation. If you look at where we've been for the last couple of years, we've been at long-term rates at 1.5% to 2%. On a normal yield curve, you'd find the 10 to 30-year bonds are around 5%. And we're talking about treasury bonds. Normally up around 4.5%, 5%. That's a normal curve that's existed for a long time. Not just in U.S. treasuries, but has existed across a few centuries for bonds, government bonds, whether they be French, whether they be English, whether they be German, whether they be U.S. That was kind of a relationship. Right now, we're at a very low point. So you have to ask the question, why? And especially with a government debt approaching $30 trillion. If you listen to people talk, that's going to be a debt left to our children or our grandchildren. That's a huge debt overhanging everything. So if that really is a question of credit quality and the question of what credit, if it's ever going to get paid off, why are rates so low? Well, here's what I think, and I'm pretty sure that I'm right about this. We went through a great recession. We've gone through a pandemic. And what have central banks done? Not just the Federal Reserve, but the European Central Bank, the Central Bank in China, the Central Bank of Japan. All these central banks have done the same thing. They went out into the market and they did stimulus. And how did they do stimulus? They bought bonds. And they put money into the system by buying bonds. So in the case of the Federal Reserve, they bought treasuries, they bought some corporate bonds, they bought some municipal bonds. They're buying bonds. And that has kept a demand for the U.S. Treasury, a big demand for the U.S. Treasury. And why the Treasury? It's the most traded security in the world. It's traded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is part of the reserves for most countries, the U.S. Treasury bonds. And so they bought that. But we're coming to a time now where the Federal Reserve is talking about qualitative tightening. It's been qualitative easing. QE1, QE2, QE3, been a time in which the Federal Reserve has been buying bonds in the open market in order to put money. Because when the Federal Reserve or when the European Central Bank or when country central banks buy bonds, what they're actually doing is they're putting money onto the balance sheets and into the checking accounts of the people they're buying money from. And they don't have to have money in their account. They are the central bank. But now we're entering a time in which they want to deleverage. They want to begin to reduce their balance sheet. They want to reduce what they hold. And we started through that process in 2017. And over that period of time, 2017 to 2019, there was an attempt to really reduce the holdings of the Federal Reserve, for example. And over those 2 years, they let bonds mature and pay off and didn't replace those bonds. But they wanted to do it in a very systematic and slow way. And so if you look at the 2 years, 2017 to 2019, the total amount of deleveraging was just $700 billion. It was very small. If they were to just take the philosophy, we're going to dump the bonds, we're not going to mature, we're just going to drop it in the market, long-term rates would soar. So there is a logic and a reason in why they want to do it in a controlled fashion without causing undue hardship by causing U.S. Treasury bonds to sink in value, because if interest rates go up, it's like a pendulum. When the rates go up, the prices go down. When rates go down, prices go up. So they want to do it in a measured way, but they want to really begin to allow rates to return to a normal level. The Federal Reserve controls short-term interest rates. They set the Fed funds rate. That's the rate at which the banks can borrow from the Treasury and borrow from one another. They set the discount rate. Those are short-term rates, very short-term rates, overnight rates. But they have little control over long-term rates. They can go into the market and buy bonds, and that gives them some control. But in fact, the Fed doesn't have anywhere near the capacity to control the amount of treasuries that are in the marketplace, that are being floated from pensions, from countries, from all the people that own treasuries. They don't have near enough in control that they can control the interest rates on the long-term level. That's a supply and demand question. So the demand for treasuries, U.S. treasuries, is significantly higher than normal, and that's why the rates are what they are. But when the Fed begins to deleverage, and they're talking about deleveraging this year, if they have a significant deleveraging, they'll see long-term interest rates begin to climb. What that's going to affect is it's going to affect the banks, because banks normally work on a 4% spread between the amount of money that they're borrowing from customers and what they're loaning. So banks borrow short-term and loan long-term. They're borrowing money from customers in CDs and checking accounts and so on, and they're loaning that money long-term. That spread usually has to be 4% for banks to be healthy. It's not been 4%. It's been 2 to 3%. Even with Fed funds set at zero and banks being able to borrow from the Fed at no interest, it's still a short spread. So the first thing that'll happen is probably the banks will get healthier for a while. But that also means they're going to raise rates. You're going to see mortgage rates go up. You're going to see a lot of rates that are in the marketplace rise because the Treasury rates are rising, and Treasuries are always a replacement for loans. If a bank has an issue and wants to increase their quality, you can buy Treasuries and get the interest rate. Right now, that doesn't make sense. Borrowing at zero and getting 1.8 or 1.9 doesn't make sense. But at 4 or 5%, it will make a difference. So look for interest rates to begin to rise. That's going to change the aspect for the stock market as well. That's why we're here to talk about money on Saturdays.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors.